Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping into a world of golden mosaics and Greek fire, of emperors crowned in purple and scholars preserving the learning of the ancient world, of a civilization that lasted 1,000 years after everyone said Rome had fallen, and that shaped the world we live in more profoundly than most people realise. We're talking about the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, and it was far more complex, more brilliant and more human than the word Byzantine suggests. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of the Byzantine Empire begins with a question that historians still argue about. When did it start? The Byzantines themselves never used that word. They called themselves Romans, Romano, and they meant it without irony. They were the Roman Empire. The city of Rome might have fallen to the Visigoths in 410 CE, and to Odoacer in 476 CE, but from their perspective in Constantinople, the empire had not fallen. It had simply moved east to the city that Constantine the Great had founded on the Bosporus in 330 CE, and named after himself. Constantinople, the city of Constantine, the new Rome. Constantinople is one of the great geographical gifts in the history of civilization. It sits on a narrow peninsula where Europe meets Asia, where the Bosporus connects the Black Sea to the Marmara, and then to the Aegean and the Mediterranean beyond. It is defensible in a way that almost no other great city in history has been. The sea on three sides, the land approach protected by the great walls that Theodosius II built in the 5th century. Walls so massive and so well engineered that they will not be breached for 1,000 years. It sits at the crossroads of the great trade routes between east and west, north and south. Whoever controls Constantinople controls the movement of goods and ideas between the known world's major civilizations. The Byzantines understand this. They never let go of it voluntarily. The empire that survives in the east while the west collapses is not immediately recognizable as what it will become. In the 4th and 5th centuries it is still very much a Roman state. Latin-speaking in its law and administration, pagan in significant portions despite the Christianization that Constantine began, governed by a bureaucracy and military structure inherited from the classical Roman Empire. The transformation into something distinctively Byzantine, Greek-speaking Orthodox Christian, increasingly Eastern in its culture, happens gradually across the 5th, 6th and 7th centuries, shaped by barbarian invasion, religious controversy, and the emergence of new powers on the empire's borders. Our three companions tonight are Helena, a silk weaver in Constantinople in the 6th century, during the reign of Justinian the Great, whose workshop produces the luxury fabrics that are the Byzantine economy's most valuable export. There is Nicephorus, a soldier in the Byzantine army during the 10th century, the era of military revival under the soldier emperors, a man who has spent his career on the frontiers and who has seen more of the world than most of his contemporaries. And there is Anna, a scholar and physician in the court of the Palaiologan dynasty in the 14th century, the last great flowering of Byzantine intellectual life before the empire's final contraction, a woman whose learning spans the Greek classical tradition and the Arabic medical texts and the Latin scholasticism transforming European thought. Justinian I, who rules the Byzantine Empire from 527 to 565 CE, is one of the most consequential rulers in the history of the world, and the scale of his ambition is matched only by the mixed results of its pursuit. He comes to the throne with a vision, the Renovation Imperia, the restoration of the empire. That means nothing less than the reconquest of the Western Roman territories lost to the barbarian kingdoms. He will reconquer North Africa from the Vandals, Italy from the Ostrogoths, and parts of Spain from the Visigoths. He will commission the most ambitious legal reform in history. He will build the Hagia Sophia. He will nearly destroy the empire in the process, and he will leave it more vulnerable to the challenges that follow. The Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, is Justinian's most enduring achievement and one of the greatest buildings in human history. Built in just 5 years between 532 and 537 CE by the architects Anthimus of Trils and Isidore of Miletus, it represents a solution to an architectural problem that had defeated every previous builder: how to place a circular dome on a square base. The pendentives, the curved triangular sections that transition between the square walls and the circular base of the dome, are an engineering solution of breathtaking elegance. The dome itself, 40 metres above the floor, appears to float without support, an effect achieved by the ring of 40 windows at its base that flood the space with light and create the illusion that the dome is suspended from heaven rather than resting on walls. The Nika riots of 532 CE, the week-long uprising that nearly ended Justinian's reign before it had properly begun, are one of the most dramatic events in Byzantine history. What begins as a dispute between the chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, escalates into a general uprising against the government. The rioters burn much of Constantinople and are on the verge of deposing the emperor when his general Belisarius and his empress Theodora save the situation. Theodora with her famous speech refusing to flee, Belisarius with the military force that suppresses the riot at the cost of 30,000 lives in the Hippodrome. Helena's workshop is near the harbour of the Golden Horn. Constantinople in the 6th century is the largest city in the Western world, perhaps 500,000 people drawn from across the empire and beyond. The city smells of the sea and of charcoal and of the particular chemical sharpness of the dyeing workshops where the Byzantine purple, extracted from the murex shellfish at extraordinary expense, is produced. The silk that Helena weaves is not ordinary silk. It is the luxury fabric of the ancient world, its production a state secret, its export regulated by the imperial government, its value by weight exceeding that of gold. The raw silk comes from the east, the Byzantines having their own silkworm cultivation, introduced according to the stories by monks who smuggled the eggs out of China hidden in hollow walking sticks. Justinian's legal reform, the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, is arguably his most lasting legacy. Completed in stages under the direction of the lawyer Tritonian, it takes the enormous and contradictory mass of Roman law accumulated over 1,000 years and organises it into a coherent and usable system. The institutes, the digest, the codex, the novels, these 4 parts become the foundation of the legal tradition of the Christian world, transmitted to medieval Europe, forming the basis of the legal systems of most of continental Europe. When you encounter the concept of legal personhood, the distinction between public and private law, or the principle that the accused is innocent until proven guilty, you are encountering ideas that Justinian's lawyers systematized in 6th century Constantinople. Theodora, Justinian's wife, the woman who saved his throne during the Nika riots with her famous declaration that the purple is a fine burial shroud, is born into the circus world, the daughter of a bearkeeper at the Hippodrome. She became an actress and courtesan before meeting Justinian and eventually persuading him to change the law, prohibiting senators from marrying women of her background. As empress, she exercises real political power, her own correspondence, her own network of clients and informants, her own theological positions, her own foreign policy initiatives. The mosaic portrait of her in the church of San Vitale in Ravenna, jewelled, purple-robed, carrying the golden chalice, is one of the great images of Byzantine art and one of the great portraits of power in human history. Constantinople in its prime is a city unlike any other in the medieval world. Its population, perhaps 500,000 at its peak, makes it 10 times larger than any city in Western Europe at the same period. Its streets are paved, its aqueducts bring fresh water from sources 40 kilometres away. Its forums and colonnaded streets and churches are built in a tradition of monumental architecture the Western world has forgotten. The Hippodrome, capable of holding 100,000 spectators, is the social and political heart of the city, the place where the emperor appears before his people, where chariot races take place, where political demonstrations happen, and where, occasionally, political crises begin. The city is divided into distinct districts, each with its own character. The commercial district around the Golden Horn, where the merchants of Venice and Genoa and Amalfi and the Islamic world maintain their trading establishments. The ecclesiastical district around the Hagia Sophia. The palace complex on the eastern tip of the peninsula. The residential district spreading across the peninsula's hills, their wooden houses punctuated by churches and cisterns, and the occasional aristocratic mansion. Helena walks these streets every day and knows them as well as she knows her own body. The shortcut through the Tanner's Quarter, the fountain where the water is coldest, the baker who opens earliest. The Byzantine economy is more sophisticated than its medieval Western European contemporaries. The gold solidus, the Byzantine gold coin that maintains its purity for 7 centuries, from Constantine to the 11th century, is the reserve currency of the medieval world, accepted from England to India, its consistency the foundation of Byzantine commercial power. The silk trade is regulated by the state but conducted by private merchants and craftspeople like Helena, the state taking its share through licensing and taxation. The grain supply is managed by the state with an efficiency that keeps the capital fed through sieges and famines that would have destroyed a less organized urban administration. The markets of Constantinople are the commercial center of the medieval world, and the variety of goods reflects the city's position at the crossroads of major trade routes: silk from China and from the Byzantine workshops, spices from India and Arabia, furs from the Russian north, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, glass from Syria, metalwork from Persia, all of it passing through Constantinople, taxed at the customs houses, sold in its markets, reshipped across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Helena knows these markets intimately. The spice dealer who gives her credit, the ribbon merchant whose prices she knows to the last coin, the days when the ships from Egypt arrive and the whole commercial district smells of grain. Nicephorus has been a soldier for 20 years when we find him in the 10th century, during the reign of the Emperor Nicephorus II Phocas, the pale death of the Saracens, as his Arab enemies call him, one of the great soldier emperors of the Byzantine military revival. He is a tagmata soldier, a member of the professional standing army that the Macedonian dynasty has rebuilt and retrained, and he has served on every frontier of the empire, in the east against the Arab Hamdani Emirate of Aleppo, in the north against the Bulgarians, in the west in the occasional expeditions to recover parts of Italy. The Byzantine army of the 10th century is the most professional military force in the medieval world. It inherits the Roman tradition of discipline and organization, adapted across 6 centuries of fighting multiple enemies of completely different military styles. The heavy cavalry of the Persians and Arabs, the infantry masses of Slavs and Bulgarians, the mobile archery of steppe peoples, the naval warfare of Arab fleets. The Byzantine army has developed flexible responses to all of them, guided by a sophisticated military literature, the strategical that codifies centuries of accumulated tactical wisdom. Nicephorus has read them all. He believes in preparation the way some men believe in God. Greek fire is the Byzantine Empire's most famous military secret and one of the most effective weapons of the medieval world. A liquid incendiary compound that burns on water and cannot be extinguished by water, it is deployed primarily by the Byzantine navy through bronze tubes mounted on the prows of warships, projecting a stream of burning liquid at enemy vessels. Its composition was a state secret so carefully guarded that it was lost after the empire's fall. Byzantine naval victories against Arab fleets in the 7th and 8th centuries, against the Russian fleet of Prince Igor in the 10th century, demonstrated repeatedly that Greek fire could destroy wooden ships with a completeness that demoralized enemies who had no counter to it. Nicephorus has seen Greek fire used in action once, during a naval engagement on the Aegean. He was on a transport ship, not one of the warships equipped with the fire siphons, and he watched from a distance as the bronze tubes turned toward the Arab galleys, and the liquid fire arced across the water, and the ships burned. The Arab sailors who jumped into the water found that the fire followed them. Some of them were still burning when they drowned. He has not forgotten this. He uses the memory when he needs to remind himself of what the empire is capable of, beneath the bureaucracy and the theology and the ceremony. The Theodosian Walls, the great triple land walls built by Theodosius II in the 5th century, extending 6 kilometres across the peninsula, are the empire's ultimate defensive asset. The outer wall, the inner wall, and the great inner wall, each taller than the last, each equipped with towers at regular intervals, the whole system supplemented by a moat. They have defeated every assault for 1,000 years. The Avars, the Arabs, the Bulgarians, the Russians. All have thrown their armies against these walls and retreated. Nicephorus has stood on the walls and looked out at the empty plain where enemies have camped and failed, and he has felt the particular weight of being responsible for something that matters this much. The Byzantine Empire is a Christian empire, and its Christianity is not a superficial overlay on an otherwise secular state. It is the foundation of imperial ideology, the basis of the emperor's claim to authority, the organising principle of the calendar and the daily life and the art and the architecture. The emperor is the vicegerent of God on earth, the 13th apostle, whose role is to govern the Christian people in accordance with divine will and to protect the true faith. The intimate entanglement of political and religious authority, Caesaropapism, means that theological disputes are political crises, and political crises have theological dimensions in a way that has no parallel in the medieval West. The iconoclast controversy, the debate over whether it was permissible to make and venerate images of Christ and the saints, convulsed the Byzantine Empire for over a century, from roughly 726 to 843 CE. The iconoclasts, supported by a series of emperors beginning with Leo III, ordered the destruction of religious images throughout the empire. The iconodules, those who defended image veneration, resisted sometimes at the cost of their lives, supported by the monks of the great monasteries, and eventually by the papacy in Rome. The controversy was not merely theological. It was a conflict between imperial authority and monastic independence that touched every level of Byzantine society. The Great Schism of 1054 CE is the most consequential event in the history of Christianity after its founding. The papal legate Cardinal Humbert places a bull of excommunication on the altar of the Hagia Sophia, directed at the Patriarch of Constantinople. The Patriarch responds by excommunicating the legate. The two churches have been growing apart for centuries in language, liturgical practice, theological emphasis, and the question of papal authority, and 1054 formalises a division developing for generations. The mutual excommunications will not be lifted until 1964. Helena is deeply orthodox in the way that most Byzantines are deeply orthodox, not as a theological position arrived at through reflection, but as the air she breathes, the rhythm of her days. She attends the Hagia Sophia for the great feasts, the Easter liturgy with its incense and its chanting, and the light coming through the dome windows in the way that makes everyone feel they are in the presence of something beyond the ordinary world. She keeps the fasting days with matter-of-fact discipline. She prays before her icons with a directness and familiarity that Protestant observers 3 centuries later will find scandalous, and that she would find incomprehensible to question. The monasteries of the Byzantine world are its intellectual and spiritual powerhouses, and Mount Athos, the peninsula in northern Greece entirely given over to monastic communities, is their supreme expression. Founded in the 9th century and continuously inhabited since, Athos is home to communities from across the Orthodox world: Greek, Bulgarian, Serbian, Georgian, Russian. The libraries of the Athonite monasteries contain some of the most important collections of Greek manuscripts in the world, preserved through the fall of Constantinople and the Ottoman period to the present day. When Renaissance scholars rediscovered the text of classical antiquity, many of them came from Byzantine monasteries. Byzantine art is one of the great artistic traditions of human history, and one that Western audiences have often struggled to appreciate because it operates according to aesthetic principles fundamentally different from those of the Western tradition descending from the Renaissance. Byzantine art is not trying to create an illusion of 3-dimensional space, or capture the particular appearance of a particular individual. It is trying to make visible the invisible, to represent the divine in a form the human eye can perceive, to create an image that is simultaneously a window into the spiritual world and a physical object in the material world. The mosaic is the supreme art form of the Byzantine tradition. The technique? Setting small cubes of glass and stone and gold into a plaster surface, each cube tilted at a slightly different angle to catch the light, creates an effect no other medium can replicate. In candlelight, the gold background of a Byzantine mosaic seems to move, to breathe, to emanate light, rather than merely reflect it. The figures that float against this golden ground: Christ, Partocratic in the dome, the Virgin Orans with her arms raised, the ranks of apostles and martyrs on the walls, are not portraits of individuals but images of types, of eternal realities, their faces frontal, their eyes enormous, their gestures hieratic and precise. The preservation of classical learning is perhaps the Byzantine Empire's most consequential contribution to world history. While the libraries and schools of the Western Roman Empire declined, their Byzantine counterparts maintained the tradition of classical Greek education, the paideia, that transmitted the texts of Homer and Plato and Thucydides and Aristotle, and the Greek tragedians through the medieval period to the Renaissance. Without Byzantine scholarship, the Renaissance rediscovery of classical antiquity would have been far more limited. Many texts that define the Western intellectual tradition survived only in Byzantine copies, preserved in the libraries of Constantinople and Mount Athos, copied and recopied by monks who may not always have understood what they were preserving, but who preserved it nonetheless. Anna works in the Library of the Patriarchate, cataloguing and copying texts that range from the Church Fathers to Hippocrates to Plato to Arabic medical compendiums. She writes in a Greek that is simultaneously the language of the New Testament and the language of Plato, the same script and vocabulary serving for theology and medicine and philosophy and poetry, the unity of the Greek intellectual tradition, a constant presence in everything she reads and writes. She's aware that she is living at the end of something, that the empire is smaller than it was, that the Ottoman pressure is increasing, that the world her scholarship inhabits is fragile. She works harder because of this. The Paleologan Renaissance, the cultural flowering of the last Byzantine centuries, produces art of extraordinary quality. The mosaics of the Cura Church in Constantinople, created in the early 14th century, represent Byzantine mosaic art at its most refined. Figures with psychological depth and spatial organisation that anticipates the Italian Renaissance by decades. The scholars of the Paleologan court, Gregory Palamas, Theodore Metachites, Gemistos Plethen, are engaging seriously with both the Byzantine tradition and new intellectual currents from the West. When the empire falls and its scholars flee to Italy, they bring knowledge of Greek antiquity that catalyses the Renaissance in ways that Italian humanists acknowledge and celebrate. The Byzantine Empire's decline is not a single event but a process extending across several centuries, punctuated by periods of recovery that make the eventual fall feel less inevitable in retrospect than it does when viewed from the end. The 7th century is the Great Catastrophe, the Arab conquests that strip the empire of Egypt, Syria, Palestine and North Africa, reducing it from a Mediterranean superpower to a regional power centred on Anatolia and the Balkans. This is the transformation that truly makes the empire Byzantine rather than Roman, forcing the shift from a Latin-based imperial identity to a Greek-based one, from a universal claim to a more limited but more intensely defended particularity. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071 brings another catastrophe. The Seljuk Turks under Alp Arslan defeat and capture the Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV, Diogenes in the one battle the Byzantines absolutely could not afford to lose. The defeat opens Anatolia, the heartland of the empire, the source of most of its agricultural wealth and military manpower, to Turkish settlement that will eventually transform it from a Greek-speaking Christian land into the Turkish-speaking Muslim land of modern Turkey. The loss of Anatolia forces the empire into structural dependency on Western European mercenaries and on the Italian city-states for naval support, dependencies that prove deeply problematic. The Fourth Crusade of 1204 is the wound from which the Byzantine Empire never fully recovers. What begins as a Western European crusade aimed at Egypt is diverted, through Venetian commercial interest, Byzantine dynastic politics, and the dynamics of a crusading army that needs to pay its debts, to Constantinople itself. The city that has never been taken by assault is sacked by Western Christians, its churches stripped, its population subjected to 3 days of violence, its accumulated wealth carried away to Venice and the crusading lords. The Latin Empire lasts only until 1261, when Michael VIII Palaiologos recovers the city, but the damage is permanent, the treasury gone, the prestige damaged beyond recovery, the relationship between Eastern and Western Christianity poisoned in a way that will make cooperation against the Ottoman threat all but impossible. Anna lives in the world of the late Byzantine Empire, with a clarity about its situation that the court's ceremonial grandeur sometimes obscures. The empire controls Constantinople and parts of Greece and a few Aegean islands. The Ottoman Empire surrounds it on almost every side. The great families spend as much energy fighting each other as resisting external pressure. Western powers who might help have demands, reunion of the churches, submission to Rome, that the Orthodox population will not accept. She continues her scholarship not despite these circumstances but because of them, with the urgency of someone who understands that what she's preserving may not survive much longer in its current form. The fall of Constantinople on 29th May 1453 is one of the pivotal events of world history. The end of the Roman Empire in any form, the end of the medieval period by one traditional reckoning, the event that accelerated the Byzantine scholarly diaspora to Italy and contributed to the Renaissance and the establishment of Ottoman Constantinople that would shape the Eastern Mediterranean for 4.5 centuries. It is also, in its immediate human dimensions, a story of extraordinary courage, a city of perhaps 50,000 people defending walls designed for an army 10 times that size against an Ottoman force of perhaps 80,000 under the young Sultan Mehmed II, who's 21 years old and has been preparing for this moment since he came to the throne. Mehmed II brings to the siege the largest cannon ever cast, the bombard made by the Hungarian engineer Urban, capable of throwing a ball weighing half a ton against the Theodosian Walls. The walls that have never been breached are breached. Not immediately. The defenders repair the damage at night. The Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani leads the defence with skill and courage that prolongs the siege for 53 days. But the walls are being destroyed systematically, and the defenders are too few to hold the entire perimeter. And on the morning of 29th May, the Ottoman forces flood through a small gate and the city falls. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaeologus, dies in the fighting. No body is ever definitively identified. The legend that grew up afterward, that he was turned to marble and sleeps beneath the walls, waiting to be awakened when Constantinople is restored to the Christians, is the Byzantine version of the Arthur myth, the sleeping king who will return when needed. Anna is not in Constantinople when it falls. She has been sent to the Peloponnese with a collection of manuscripts, part of the dispersal of scholars and texts that the court has been quietly conducting as the siege approaches. She learns of the fall weeks later, sitting in a monastery in Mistral with a manuscript she has carried out of the dying empire on her lap. Mehmed II, entering the conquered city, goes first to the Hagia Sophia. He takes a handful of earth and pours it over his turban in a gesture of humility before God. He orders that the church be converted to a mosque. He orders that the city's remaining population not be harmed. He takes the title Kaiser Rum, Caesar of Rome, adding it to his other titles, claiming the inheritance of the Byzantine Empire for the Ottoman Sultanate. He is, in his own way, continuing the story rather than ending it. The Roman Empire transformed once more, the city that Constantine founded continuing under a new master, the new Rome absorbing its conqueror as it has absorbed so many before. The Byzantine Empire ends on May 29th, 1453, but what it built does not end. The Orthodox Christian tradition that Byzantium created and transmitted, the theology, the liturgy, the iconographic tradition, the monastic culture, survives and spreads. Russia, which received Christianity from Byzantium in 988 CE, when Prince Vladimir of Kiev converted and married a Byzantine princess, sees itself as the third Rome after the fall of Constantinople. Moscow's Kremlin, with its Byzantine-influenced architecture, its double-headed eagle, its Caesaropapist political theology, is in significant ways a Byzantine institution transplanted to the Russian north. The Byzantine scholarly diaspora to Italy is one of the decisive events of the Renaissance. The scholars who left Constantinople before and after the fall, Genistas Plethron, Bessarion, Theodore Gaza, John Angelopoulos, brought with them knowledge of Greek language and classical texts that transformed Italian humanism. Plethon's lectures on Plato in Florence in 1438 inspired Cosmo de' Medici to found the Platonic Academy. Bessarion's collection of Greek manuscripts donated to Venice became the foundation of the Biblioteca Marciano. The Greek teachers who taught in Italian universities transmitted the knowledge that made possible the new biblical scholarship of Erasmus and the recovery of the full range of classical Greek literature. The legal legacy of Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis is the most practically consequential Byzantine inheritance. Rediscovered in Western Europe in the 11th century, it became the foundation of the canon law of the Catholic Church, the basis of the legal systems of most of continental Europe, and through European colonialism the foundation of legal traditions across the globe. The concepts of Roman law, legal personhood, the distinction between public and private law, the principle of equity, the sophisticated framework for commercial transactions, are Byzantine transmissions that shape the legal reality of the modern world. Anna's manuscripts reach Florence eventually, passed from monk to merchant to humanist scholar, copied and translated and commented upon, becoming part of the river of classical and Byzantine learning that feeds the Renaissance. She does not know this. She dies in Mistral, old and in reduced circumstances, her empire gone, her city in other hands. But she has done what she set out to do. She has preserved what she could. The books outlast the empire. The learning outlasts the fall. The words of Plato and Hippocrates and Thucydides, copied and preserved through 1,000 years of Byzantine scholarship, speak to people who have never heard of Constantinople and never will. This is enough. This is more than enough. What the Byzantine Empire demonstrated across its 1,000 years is that civilization is not a fixed thing but a continuous act, that it requires constant maintenance, constant transmission, constant renewal, that it can be reduced and pressed and diminished and still survive, that the preservation of learning and the practice of art can be carried on by individuals even when the political structures that once supported them have failed. The empire fell. The tradition continued. That continuity, from the Greek philosophers to the Byzantine scholars to the Renaissance humanists to the modern world, is one of the longest unbroken threads in human intellectual history, and it passes through Constantinople. It is late evening in Constantinople. Helena has finished at the loom, the day's weaving done, the silk folded and stored. She closes the workshop and walks through the neighbourhood in the last of the evening light. The smell of the golden horn coming up from below, the sound of vesper bells from the church at the end of the street. She has lived in this city all her life. She knows its rhythms the way she knows the rhythms of the loom, the tensions that produce the pattern, the places where the thread is likely to break. She goes home, lights her oil lamp before the icon of the Virgin, says her evening prayers, and makes her supper. Nicephorus is on the walls. He is always on the walls, the hours of watch duty accumulating into a continuous relationship with the stone, and the view beyond, the plain to the north, the sea to the east, the city behind him with its churches and its markets, and its 200,000 lives. He has stood here in winter when the wind came off the Black Sea, and in summer when the heat rose off the stone, and at every hour of the night. He has stood here when enemies were visible on the plain, and when they were not. The walls have not been breached in his lifetime. He intends, with the stubbornness of a man who has made something his life's work, that they will not be breached in his. Anna is in the library, as she always is at this hour. The lamp burns on the desk, the manuscript open before her. A copy of Galen's medical text she is collating against another version, noting the differences, trying to establish which reading is correct. The monastery is quiet around her. Outside, the hills of the Peloponnese are dark against a sky full of stars. She is far from Constantinople. She will not go back. But the work she does here connects her to every scholar who has sat at a desk by lamplight and done the same thing. From Alexandria to Baghdad to Constantinople to this small room at the edge of what remains. She closes the manuscript. She blows out the lamp. In the darkness, the stars are brilliant through the window, the same stars the Greek astronomers named, and the Byzantine scholars catalogued, and that shine above the ruins of Persepolis and the steppe where the Mongols rode, and the streets of Rome, and every place where human beings have looked up and tried to understand where they are. The city breathes. The work continues. This has been Midnight Chronicle. Sleep well, wherever in the world you are tonight.